it's possible to recognize thought as a stream of appearances in consciousness, and to recognize that consciousness is the kind of the prior condition of their arising. And when you can do that, you can actually break the link between thought and psychological suffering.
I'm curious, what do you believe happens when we die?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that would require that we understand exactly how consciousness arises, and we don't understand that yet. I mean, there's certainly good reason to doubt that you, as you experience yourself most of the time, as the English-speaking person who, or subject who, has the episodic memories you have of your life, that entity floats off the brain and goes elsewhere, right? And that's the expectation that most people have who believe in souls, right? And when you hear people use so-called near-death experiences to justify a belief in an afterlife, it's that kind of arithmetic that's being done. They say, well, I saw myself in a tunnel of light, or I rose up off the table that they were performing surgery on me. I could see myself, but then I realized I was, not connected to my body, and then and then there's some story about how they met entities, or met members of their own family who had died, and they're. So if you can recognize your grandma and still understand English, and then still have a memory of the life you're leaving, all of those are modes of cognition that we know a fair amount about at the level of the brain now, and we know they can be disrupted piecemeal in life, right? We know that if you get a stroke, or if you go into the lab and they do TMS on you, transcranial magnetic stimulation, they can interrupt certain functions which really are no longer there anymore, just because with that neural real estate has been perturbed. And so the proposition here is that if you interrupt one part of neuronal function, you lose, let's say, your capacity to understand English, right? But if you destroy the brain at death, everything about yourself that's familiar can persist, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we know a lot about mind being dependent on the brain. Any function you could point to in yourself. Vision.
Mind versus brain. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, the mind on some basic level is what the brain is doing, and if the brain stops doing that, it's reasonable to expect that the functions of mind will stop. But consciousness is the fact that it's like something to be associated with that information processing, and that is still fundamentally mysterious. I mean, there's a lot that our brain is doing that seems unconscious, right? And seems unavailable to consciousness in principle. I mean, so it's these unconscious processes are delivering the contents of consciousness in each moment, right? So you and I are having a conversation. I can see you. I can hear you.
Right.
I can, there are things that are stable that I can inspect because they're among the contents of consciousness. But how all of this stuff is showing up is being unconsciously mediated and really can't be inspected. So,
right.
The example I always use is, because I'm always talking when I have to use an example, but so to some degree, however imperfectly, I am managing to follow the rules of English grammar without knowing how I do that.
Sure.
Right? And you're able to effortlessly interpret.
And understand, yeah.
Yeah. So, and in fact, you don't even have a choice. If I say the word pigeon, right, you can understand it. I mean, provided you're a native English speaker and that's in your vocabulary, you can't help but understand it. It's like you can't say, well, whatever that next word is going to be, I'm just going to block the semantics of it. No, the semantics just come in, right? And so you're doing all of this. Your brain is doing all of this unconsciously, and you can't get to a place where you are standing upstream of the parsing of the sounds I'm making. I'm just making a bunch of small mouth noises, right? And I mean, and the difference when you're in the presence of someone who's speaking a language of which you know not a single word, right? Whatever that is, Thai, say. it just sounds like pure gibberish. And the surprising thing there is that it's very hard to even imagine that anyone can decode those sounds and extract meaning at all, right? It just sounds like, well, it's amazing that that's a language, right? And yet, once you know the language, you can't help but decode it. So all of that's unconscious, and yet the fundamental mystery of our being and the most important thing in the universe, really, I mean, I would argue the only important thing in the universe is the fact that the lights are on as in and as what we are here subjectively, which is consciousness. You know, if the lights were off, right, if it was all just, if there was no distinction between biological systems and this table, right, you know, if there was nothing that it was like to be you, and there could never become something that it was like to be you or any other physical system, well then there's no important distinction between the wet stuff we have in our heads and rocks and the water in the ocean. I mean, it's all just stuff that can have no interests. It can't suffer. It can't experience happiness. It can't be deprived of happiness. It can't be creative. It can't. So the good thing about this universe is consciousness, and so and the thing we can care about. Your life is as your consciousness is in each moment, and I mean, all you have is your experience and your possible experiences, and and that's the core of our morality too. It's we are in a position with one another where we can affect each other's states of well-being and our opportunities to experience further well-being in the future, and that matters. And our conversation around that is our conversation around morality and ethics and politics and So,
how do we unlock our consciousness or expand it in a positive way? Well, besides meditation, obviously, but how can we think differently so we can unlock this consciousness for ourselves?
Yeah, well, there are many levels at which to do that. I mean, meditation is, there are many different kinds of meditation, but the kind that interests me most and which I most recommend is, it often goes by the name of mindfulness now. I mean, mindfulness is very widespread, but there's a sort of trivial versions of mindfulness, and there's the deeper version. And the deeper version is really to understand the mechanics of your own mental suffering and put yourself in a position to cease to suffer unnecessarily, right? So you notice that you're lost in thought almost every moment of your life, and much of your thinking has this mediocre character of causing you to worry about the future and regret the past and just feel a baseline dis-ease with life, right? Whether it is just what it was like for me to drive here in traffic and am I going to be late? I was supposed to be here at 10 o'clock, and so much of our life is the steady hum of that kind of thinking, right? And not to mention the bigger concerns about disease and whether your child is sick, and we're thinking we're plunged into thought in each moment. And we don't notice it. And until you learn to be mindful, you can't notice it. You might have this abstract idea that, yeah, of course I'm thinking a lot of the time, but so what? Or what's the alternative, right? There is no alternative. Each thought will arise and completely capture your attention, and then you are hostage to the emotional and behavioral imperatives of that thought, right? So. And it's necessary to some degree to be that way, because we need thought. I mean, thought is the way we organize our lives and form plans and understand what's happening, right? So almost everything that makes us human is born of our capacity for abstract thought and planning and goal formation and all the rest. But it's possible to recognize thought as a stream of appearances in consciousness, and to recognize that consciousness is the prior condition of their arising. And when you can do that, you can actually break the link between thought and psychological suffering. So, if the thought is an anxiety-producing thought, right? You can notice this whole process where a thought arises and you feel anxious, and that feeling of anxiety in your body, when once uninspected, begins to generate the motive for further thoughts along those lines. Mm-hmm. So you're thinking about the thing that makes you anxious, and because you're anxious, you're finding the anxiety intolerable. You've got resistance to feeling this feeling, and you're thinking about, like, how can I get out of this? And like, clearly I've got a lot I've got to change here. Let me get I'm going to start writing some things down on a checklist, And you're thinking without knowing that you're thinking, and you're feeling the motive force of this emotion. But once you can become mindful, which is to just be aware of what's arising in consciousness, without judgment, without reaction, without resistance, right? I mean, so to be able to notice anxiety as just a pattern of sensation in the body, right? And then when you can do that, you can see that, first of all, it's not that bad, right?
Right.
In fact,
you're not dying.
Yeah, no, and under a different framing, it's a sensation that is often pleasant, right? Like the excitement you feel, or even the anxiety you feel before you get on a roller coaster, right? If that's your thing, is something you're willing to pay to do, right? Like you want this thing. That's part of the experience.
Go skydiving.
Yeah, whatever. That's the being able to. I mean, the thrill is a thrill because you felt some of that, right? Yeah. So, and that's why I say there are other levels at which you can work with the contents of consciousness so as to cease to be unhappy. I mean, and one is to change the frame around an experience like that. So, I mean, to recognize that anxiety, the anxiety you might feel before going out on stage in front of 1,000 people, just the raw sensation in your torso and in your face. I mean, just the physiology of it.
Tenseness.
That is importantly similar to something that can have a positive frame which you seek out, like excitement, right? I mean, a much more extreme case of this is like you can, when you think of what the physical sensations are when you're working out, and working out as hard as you can work out, and in the most satisfying way, precisely the workout you'll feel good for having done. The actual sensations can be extremely unpleasant, and if they just came upon you in a different context, you would call 911. You'd be absolutely terrified, right? Like
I'm sweating profusely. Yeah. My muscles are ripping. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just. So the frame, the conceptual frame around experience does a tremendous amount. But mindfulness is a more basic ability to notice this mechanism of becoming identified with thought and resisting certain emotions and mood states, and being able to just unlock from all of that and recognize that consciousness itself, that which is simply aware of experience, is not actually changed by its contents. I mean, so like that which is aware of joy is the same thing as that which is aware of sadness, right? And on some level, it's not diminished by sadness or improved by joy, and you keep dropping back into that state. And paradoxically and happily, that state begins to have its own kind of qualitative character, which is more toward the good side of things. I mean, it's more joyful and compassionate and loving and positive. And because the antithesis of all those states is what is happening, is being kindled by our entanglement with thought and reactivity. It's the resistance to, I feel the sensations of anxiety, say, because I was lost in thought about how afraid of failure I am a moment ago. I can break that spell with mindfulness, and then notice that the physiology, which still may take a few seconds to dissipate, is fine, right? Like it's fine to feel that way. It's like it has no more meaning in that moment than a pain in the knee or indigestion or something which you completely can contextualize, and it has no implication for who you are as a person, right? Like you don't feel pain in the knee and abstract from those unpleasant sensations back upon yourself and think, I'm such a fucking schmuck, right? Like, well,
Right.
who am I? Like, how did I become this person? Like it doesn't. But people with anxiety, if you've got stage fright, right? You're going out on stage and you feel nerves, that the potential for self-judgment, the potential to read into that mere peripheral display of sensation that you're this person who's didn't work out, right? In the end, people fall into that hole again and again, right? And it's completely, it's not just sort of unnecessary, it's completely unnecessary. And mindfulness is a tool that would allow you to discover that.
If you want to learn more about how to master your mind, check out this next video right here.
We're all faced with great opportunities brilliantly disguised as impossible situations, and we are at that point, at that nexus point in our evolution as a species. So then you don't try to fix that. That's never going to work. What you do